He walked into that restaurant expecting an ordinary evening. What he discovered inside those walls would rearrange everything he thought he'd accepted about his life. And what unfolded at that table, nobody seated there could have seen it coming. By 32, Nathan Cole had buried his belief in love so completely that he'd stopped even glancing in its direction. Then his friends physically dragged him to a blind dinner setup, and through the door walked a woman the other guests couldn't stop murmuring about, for every wrong reason imaginable. Victoria Sterling, billionaire, CEO, and at that moment, the loneliest looking person in the room. What Nathan did next silenced every voice at that table. What Victoria confessed afterward cracked something open inside her that had been sealed for years. And what began as an evening no one actually wanted became the story neither of them could ever have imagined writing. If this story reaches you tonight, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The reservation was for 7:30. Nathan Cole arrived at 7:28 because showing up late felt like an insult, even when he had absolutely no desire to be there. He stood outside Ardon, one of those restaurants where the menu carried no prices, and the lighting was engineered specifically to make every guest look like they were either tumbling into love or finalizing a business merger. He tugged at the collar of his button-down shirt and wished, not for the first time that night, that he'd simply said no. He had almost said no 3 separate times. The first was on a Tuesday when Marcus called and said, "There's this woman. She's remarkable. Just come to dinner. It's low-key. No pressure." Nathan had said he'd think about it. The second time, Diane, Marcus's wife, who had known Nathan since their college days and therefore operated without a single personal boundary, had sent him a text message that included the phrase, "You're not getting any younger," and a winking emoji. Nathan had replied, "I'll see," which everyone in his life had long since decoded as a very polite probably not. The third time, Diane had called while Nathan was tucking his daughter in for the night, and she'd said, "Sophie already told me you should go. I asked her." Nathan had looked across the bedroom at his 7-year-old, propped up against her pillows with a stuffed rabbit and a guilty expression that confirmed every word of it. She had been consulted, and she had absolutely sold him out. "Fine," he'd said. One dinner. That was the deal he'd made with himself, standing on the sidewalk outside Ardon, watching a valet whisk away someone's car keys. One dinner. He'd be polite. He'd be decent. Then he'd go home. Diane would have her story about having tried, and that would be the end of it. He went inside. The hostess guided him to a private dining room in the back, not just a table, but an entire room to themselves, which told him that Marcus had spent real money on this, which told him that Diane considered this a serious occasion, which told him that he was already, in some meaningful sense, cornered. The room held a rectangular table set for 8. 6 seats were already filled. Marcus crossed the floor the moment he spotted Nathan, moving with the enthusiasm of a man who had clearly been warned by his wife not to make things awkward, and was making things completely awkward. "You actually came," Marcus said, gripping his hand and clapping him on the shoulder. "I said I would. I know, but Marcus, right? Yeah, come on. Let me introduce everyone." There were 3 other couples besides Marcus and Diane, James and Claire, whom Nathan vaguely recognized from some work function 2 years back. A man named Philip who kept touching his watch in the way people touch expensive things, a subconscious reminder to themselves and everyone around them. And Philip's girlfriend, whose name Nathan immediately lost track of because she was describing a trip to Santorini, and he had quietly stopped listening. The chair beside Nathan's was empty. "She's just a few minutes behind," Diane said, materializing at his elbow with a glass of sparkling water, and the carefully composed expression of a woman who had invested considerable emotional energy into this particular evening. "Her name is Victoria. She's brilliant, Nathan, I mean it. And she's funny. She doesn't take herself too seriously, Even though by every measure she probably could. Diane, I'm just saying. I know. Thank you. She gave him a look, but acknowledged he wasn't entirely convinced. Squeezed his arm, and returned to her seat. Nathan picked up the menu and tried to look like someone perfectly comfortable with being there. The truth was, dinner parties didn't bother him. Meeting new people didn't particularly unsettle him either. What he'd grown genuinely uncomfortable with, quietly, over the better part of 3 years, was that specific combination of hope and disappointment that came with being set up. The performance of it, the way you had to present some curated version of yourself and wait to see if it cleared a stranger's invisible bar. He'd done it twice before, both times at Diane's suggestion. Both times it had ended after a handful of dates with a mutual, amicable agreement that it simply wasn't right, which was fine, genuinely fine. But both times he'd also found himself sitting in his car in the parking lot of his building afterward, turning over the particular shape of the life he'd ended up with, wondering quietly how it had gotten so still. He was 32. He had a daughter he loved more than anything on this earth. He had a career he was good at, civil engineering, infrastructure contracts, unglamorous work but solid and honest. He had a 2-bedroom apartment that Sophie had colonized almost completely with crayon, drawings and stuffed animals and a collection of small rocks she curated for reasons she had explained to him multiple times and that he had never fully grasped. He had people who cared about him. He had a life, a good life. He knew it was a good life. He just sometimes sat in parking lots and noticed how quiet it was. He was on his second glass of water and deep into the breadbasket when the door to the private room opened behind him, and something shifted in the room, that subtle, wordless recalibration that happens when someone enters a space and the people already inside aren't quite sure how to arrange their faces. He turned. Victoria Sterling walked in the way a woman walks when she's learned long ago that the only real option, when a room has already started forming its opinions before she's touched the floor, is to walk like she owns the building. She was 30 years old. Nathan would find out later. She stood around 5'5" in heels that were sensible rather than showy. She wore a navy dress, elegant, well-fitted, expensive in the quiet way that expensive things are when they're chosen by someone with actual taste rather than just resources. Her hair was dark, pulled back at the sides, loose at the ends. She held a small clutch in one hand and her phone in the other. Finishing a text message, she came through the door. She looked up only after sending it, and her expression was composed, polished, and deliberately neutral. She was a large woman. That was the plain truth of it. Not a secret, not a tragedy, simply a fact. Victoria Sterling was a large woman, and in the 3 seconds between her appearance in the doorway and the hostess guiding her toward the table, Nathan watched the room do the thing rooms do, the fractional adjustments, the quick exchange of glances between Philip and his girlfriend, the small and deliberate way Claire straightened in her chair, as though bracing for impact, the way Marcus, his friend, his genuinely good friend, glanced briefly at his wife with an expression that wasn't cruel, but wasn't nothing either. Nathan looked at Victoria Sterling and saw none of those things. What he saw was a woman crossing a restaurant dining room with her shoulders back, her chin level, and her face locked into a posture of complete control. And underneath that, in the set of her jaw, in the way her thumb pressed against the edge of her phone case, in the half-second of absolute stillness before she reached the table and arranged her smile, what he saw was a woman who was exhausted, not tired from lack of sleep, tired the way you get tired when you've done the same thing in the same rooms 100 times over, and you've become flawless at making it look effortless. Victoria, Diane said warmly, rising to meet her. I'm so glad you made it, of course. Her voice was low, unhurried, clear. She kissed Diane on the cheek. The traffic on Meridian was brutal. I should have taken the bridge. You're not late at all. Come sit down. This is Nathan. She looked at him. Nathan stood up. His mother had drilled that particular reflex into him so deeply it fired before thought, and said, Hi, Nathan Cole. Something moved across her face when he stood. Something quick, almost imperceptible, like she'd anticipated something different and had to quietly revise her read of the situation. Then it was gone, and she was extending her hand, grip firm and deliberate. "Victoria Sterling, sorry to have kept everyone waiting." "You didn't," he said. 7:31. That's essentially on time. She looked at him for a moment. A real look, not a polite one. "I appreciate a man who tracks the clock." Occupational habit. "I work in infrastructure timelines." "What does that mean exactly?" "Bridges, mostly. Road systems. I figure out how long things take. I tell people. They don't listen. And then I was right." Something crossed her face. Quick, startled, almost involuntary. Not quite a smile. "The architecture of one. That sounds frustrating," she said. "Sitting down." "It is," he said. "Sitting down too. But I've learned to be right quietly." This time she did smile. Small, fast, and she reached for her water glass immediately afterward, something to do with her hands. But it was real. Nathan noticed it the way you notice a light switching on in a window he assumed was empty. The evening began. Dinner at Ardon unfolded the way dinner at that kind of restaurant always does. Slowly, course after deliberate course, with pauses designed to feel luxurious, but occasionally just feeling long. The conversation circled the usual territory for a gathering of people who dined in private rooms, real estate, travel, a few tentative brushstrokes of politics that everyone quickly retreated from, and a prolonged and largely pointless debate about whether a restaurant in the financial district was actually worth the reservation. Nathan ate and listened and responded when spoken to and kept his phone in his pocket because he'd specifically told Sophie not to check hers at dinner, and he believed in the principle even when it cost him. Beside him, Victoria was doing what he suspected she'd had years to perfect at exactly these kinds of tables, present, engaged, and contributing precisely enough to be considered excellent company without offering anything that could be turned against her. She knew things. That was clear within 20 minutes. When the conversation drifted to supply chain logistics, she had specific and accurate things to say. When James mentioned a development project in the East Corridor, she knew the zoning history. When Philip made an offhand remark about a tech acquisition, she gently interrupted to correct a figure he'd cited, then immediately softened it with "I might have the updated number. That deal's been moving fast," in a way that let him save face while not letting the wrong information stand uncorrected. She was sharp, the particular kind of sharp that people develop when they've had to work twice as hard as everyone around them just to be taken seriously. Not showy about it, not performing, just precise, like a blade honed past the point of ceremony. Nathan found himself paying closer attention than he'd expected. "So," said Philip somewhere between the second and third course, in the tone of a man who has decided to be interesting. "Victoria, Sterling Capital, that's the hedge fund that restructured the Coburn portfolio last year, isn't it?" "Sterling Asset Management," she said, correcting the category without any edge. "But yes, that was a significant move. You took considerable criticism for it." "I did. Was it worth it?" She considered him for a moment. The portfolio returned 14% the following quarter. So mathematically, yes. Whether it was worth the criticism is a separate question. "You don't strike me as someone who loses much sleep over critics," Philip said. And there was something layered in his voice. Not quite admiration, not quite condescension, somewhere in the uncomfortable territory between them. Claire laughed lightly. The Santorini girlfriend nodded, as though she understood the dynamics. Nathan doubted she did. "I sleep fine," Victoria said evenly. "I've had plenty of practice." Philip smiled the smile of a man who'd been deflected and was weighing whether to try again. He tried again. "I imagine someone in your position deals with a lot of assumptions." "Everyone deals with assumptions," she said. "Sure." But he gestured, vaguely and deliberately, at nothing in particular. "You know." The table had grown perceptibly quieter, the way tables do when someone is about to say something that can't be unsaid, and everyone in the room feels it coming. I don't actually, Victoria said, still measured. Why don't you say what you mean? A beat. I just mean, Philip said, that in a room full of the typical finance crowd, you'd stand out for, well, multiple reasons. That must create some interesting dynamics. Another vague gesture that pointed at nothing specific and pointed at everything specific. Simultaneously, the table held its breath. Nathan set down his fork. He'd been watching this exchange from the moment Philip opened his mouth, and he'd recognized it immediately, the particular cruelty of the almost said, the implication dressed up as curiosity, the test masquerading as conversation. He'd seen it before, not often, but enough. He looked at Philip. I think the finance crowd probably stands out for all kinds of reasons, Nathan said. His voice was easy, conversational, not confrontational. Calm the way a closed door is calm. Victoria is obviously the most qualified person at this table to speak about that world, which is probably why you're directing the question at her. Philip blinked. I know. Nathan picked up his fork again. A compliment, I'm sure, he said the last sentence without looking at Philip, turning his attention back to his plate. The meaning arrived clean and quiet and left nowhere to go. Diane, across the table, had gone very still. Marcus was studying his wineglass. Claire had angled slightly toward James. Victoria was looking at Nathan. He didn't look back right away. He finished the bite he'd taken, and then he did look at her, and her expression was something he couldn't entirely decode. Not gratitude exactly, not surprise exactly, but something that lived between those two things and was more honest than either. So, she said, and her voice was steady, confident, steering the table back the way a person steers who has navigated harder currents than this. You did infrastructure work on the Kellerman Bridge project. Consultation on the foundation spec, he said, took 3 years longer than it should have, because the city kept changing the load requirements. I heard about that. The secondary span complications. Sterling Asset holds some of the municipal bonds associated with that corridor. I know more about load-bearing specifications than I ever anticipated needing to. That's either impressive or depressing, in my experience, she said. It's usually both, the table exhaled. The courses continued. The evening moved on. And Nathan sat quietly with the look he'd caught on her face. In that unguarded moment, the brief, raw thing she'd tucked away almost before it fully surfaced, and thought to himself, there's a real person in there who has spent a very long time being treated like she's invisible. By the third hour, the table had dissolved into smaller conversations, the way large tables always do once the main architecture collapses. Marcus and James arguing about golf handicaps, Claire and Diane on something about a school district, Philip operating his phone with the theatrical discretion of someone being completely indiscreet. The Santorini girlfriend had excused herself 20 minutes ago and returned looking newly assembled. Nathan and Victoria had been talking for close to an hour. It had happened without either of them deciding it would. One thread of conversation had pulled toward another, and then another, and somewhere in the drift they had turned slightly toward each other and the rest of the table had simply receded. She told him things she hadn't meant to tell him, though by the end she had told him all of them. About launching Sterling Asset Management at 24 with seed money from a family trust and to analysts she'd had to convince to believe in her before she'd demonstrated she'd earned it. About the first year, 4 hours of sleep a night, desk lunches, 17 decisions a week that could have dismantled everything she was building, 16 of which she'd gotten right. About the one she'd gotten wrong, which had cost her a client relationship she genuinely missed, not for the revenue, but for the person. About what it was like to be the youngest CEO in the room, while also being the most scrutinized, and how she'd learned to walk into every space already armored, because pre-arming yourself was the only reliable defense available. She said that last part, and then stopped, as though the words had surprised her on their way out. Sorry, she said. That was a lot. No, it wasn't. I don't usually, she paused. I'm usually more edited than this. Maybe the editing gets exhausting too. She looked at him. A real look, the kind she'd been rationing all evening. Yes, she said quietly. It does, he nodded. My ex-wife used to say I was a good listener. She also said it was annoying, because she preferred arguments to understanding, which I always thought was a peculiar combination of grievances. Victoria laughed, genuinely. Unguarded, a quick exhale she covered with her hand, then lowered the hand, because covering it was the edited version, and she'd just admitted the editing was wearing her down. What happened? She asked. With the marriage, if you want to talk about it. He thought about it honestly. We were 25, and I think we were in love the way you can be in love at 25. Real, but incomplete. We were both different people than we understood ourselves to be. Sophie came along and he stopped. She's not the sad part of the story. Sophie is the best thing in my life. But Emma had different ideas about what she wanted. She'd had them for a while before she told me. By the time she did, Sophie was too. That was, he picked up his glass. A hard year. Where's Emma now? Phoenix, remarried, doing well. We co-parent. Sophie goes to her for summers and some holidays. It's functional. Emma's a good mother. We just weren't, he shrugged. Some things don't work. Do you miss being married? A direct question. The kind that assumed they were past the small talk layer. They were. He considered it honestly instead of answering by reflex. I miss having a person, he said. Not in the desperate way it sounds saying that out loud. I mean I miss having someone to share the small things with. The things that aren't significant enough to call Marcus about, but that accumulate. Sophie said something genuinely hilarious yesterday, and I told it to a colleague, because there was no one else to tell it to. And she laughed politely, the way you laugh at a stranger's kid's story. And I thought, yeah, I miss someone who would actually think that was funny. Victoria was quiet for a moment. What did Sophie say? She asked. She told me her stuffed rabbit. His name is Gerald. Told her he wants to be a lawyer when he grows up because he's good at arguing. And then she said, completely seriously, I'm thinking of helping him study. A beat. Victoria smiled. Not the small controlled one from earlier. A real one. Wide enough to show the slight unevenness of her front teeth. The kind of smile that had decided, quietly, that it didn't care what it looked like. That's genuinely funny, she said. Thank you. Gerald appreciates the support. She laughed again. And this time she didn't cover it. It was nearly 10 o'clock when the evening wound down to dessert and scattered conversation. And Diane was doing the thing she did at the end of evenings she considered successful, radiating a particular quiet, glowing satisfaction that she was attempting to make look casual and failing at completely. Nathan had noticed, over the previous hour, that Philip had made some more comments in Victoria's direction that carried the same uncomfortable register as his earlier one. Nothing directly confrontational, just the persistent drip of a particular kind of social contempt. A remark about how surprising it was that she'd broken into asset management at her age. A comment about how she must be used to people underestimating her. Each one dressed in the language of observation, each one landing somewhere below the belt. Victoria had handled all of them with the precision of a woman who had been fielding exactly this 4 years. Nathan had said nothing the second time, or the third, because they were smaller and faster, and he wanted to be certain he wasn't constructing a pattern that wasn't there. He wasn't constructing it. The fourth one settled it. They were discussing a charity gala coming up the following month. Diane mentioned it was a formal event. Claire said she'd already chosen her dress, and Philip looked at Victoria with an expression that was almost a smile and said, I assume formal wear is something of a production for everyone. A very short silence. Not particularly, Victoria said. I have a tailor, of course. I just meant, I know what you meant, she said, and her voice was still composed, but her hand on the table had gone flat. A small, involuntary tell. Nathan looked at Philip. You know what I've noticed, he said. And his voice was easy, measured, the tone of a man making an observation rather than launching an attack. You keep wrapping things in I just meant, and I was only saying, but what's wrapped inside is always the same thing. The table went quiet. I don't know what you're implying, Philip said. I'm not implying anything, Nathan said. I'm saying it plainly. You've been working in a comment about Victoria's body since the salad course. Maybe you believe you're being subtle, or maybe you just appreciate the plausible deniability. But either way, it's run its course, he paused. And for what it's worth, you've spent the entire evening missing what's actually interesting about the person sitting 3 feet from you. That's your loss, not hers. Dead silence. Nathan, Diane said softly, not alarmed, just careful. I'm fine, he said, still looking at Philip, just observing. Philip held his gaze for a moment with the expression of a man performing a recalculation. Then he glanced at his watch, the expensive one, and said something to his girlfriend about a car they'd called. They left 20 minutes later. The atmosphere in the room the moment they were gone. James refilled everyone's wine. Diane found a reason to rest her hand briefly on Nathan's as she passed the dessert menu, and he pretended not to notice because it embarrassed him slightly. Marcus told a story about a camping trip that had nothing to do with anything, and everyone was grateful for it. Victoria didn't say anything directly to Nathan for several minutes. She talked to Diane. She accepted dessert. She laughed at Marcus's story. Then, very quietly, while the others were occupied, she turned to him and said, "You didn't have to do that. I know. I'm used to it. I know that too." She looked at him. Something careful was moving across her face, like she was deciding how much to trust what she was seeing. Then why? He thought about it for a second, because being used to something doesn't mean you should have to be. She held his gaze for a long, still moment. He didn't look away. "Okay," she said finally, quietly, "not thank you." Something heavier and more complicated than that, like she was accepting the truth of something she'd been quietly arguing against for a very long time. Okay, like a door, slightly opened. They left Ardon at 10, spilling out into the cool night air with the slightly dazed quality of people emerging from a long enclosed space. The valet was pulling cars around. Diane hugged everyone twice. Marcus shook hands and clapped shoulders. The extended ritual of the goodbye at this level of dinner party was its own event. Nathan had his jacket over his arm and was waiting for his car when Victoria appeared beside him. "My driver's on his way." She sighed. "Okay," he said. They stood in the companionable quiet, watching a cab pull up across the street. "I almost cancelled," she said. He looked at her. "Tonight, twice. My assistant drafted the message both times." A pause. "I usually do cancel when Diane sets these up. She's arranged things before, 3 times. I cancelled the first 2. Once you've attended enough of these evenings and had enough of the particular experience I tend to have at them, cancelling becomes the rational choice." He listened without interrupting. "I came tonight because Diane told me she had someone she genuinely wanted me to meet. Not just someone she wanted to put in a room with me to see what happened." She paused. "I'm not sure yet which category you are." "That's fair. You were good in there." Philip was easy. "It's always the easy ones that wear you down," she said, looking out at the street. "Not the hard ones. The hard ones you can fight. The easy ones just accumulate." "Yeah," Nathan said. "I think I understand that." A black car pulled smoothly to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. Victoria picked up her clutch, then looked at Nathan. That real look again, the one she'd been rationing all evening. "I don't know if I should admit this," she said, "because you'll either think I'm being dramatic, or you'll assume I say it to everyone." "I don't say it to everyone." He waited. "Tonight was the first dinner in a long time," she said carefully, "where I didn't spend the drive home thinking about the wrong things." He let that sit. "What do you usually think about?" "Whether the first was too much, whether I talked too loudly, held my fork wrong, took up too much space at the table in every sense the phrase allows, a small, tired exhale. It's boring, mostly, just loud, and tonight." She looked at him, and for the first time all evening, she wasn't managing her expression or staying 2 steps ahead of the room. She just looked at him. Tonight I'm thinking about Gerald, she said. And whether he has a specialty in mind. Contracts or litigation, he smiled. She saw it. He strikes me as a civil litigator, Nathan said. Good at arguing, but fundamentally wants things to be fair. That's quite a psychological profile for a stuffed rabbit. He's a complex guy. She smiled again. The full one, the real one. Then she turned and got in the car, and the door closed, and the black car pulled smoothly from the curb. Nathan stood on the sidewalk in the cool night air, jacket over his arm, watching the taillights disappear around the corner. Behind him, Marcus appeared and handed him his car keys, which the valet had already retrieved. And Marcus said nothing, just stood there beside him, the way old friends do. I liked her, Nathan said, mostly to himself. Yeah, Marcus said. I had a feeling you might. Nathan pocketed the keys. He thought about the look on her face when he'd stood up at the table. That quick, reflexive adjustment, like she'd expected one thing and received something entirely different. He thought about the way she'd said okay, not as gratitude, more like a quiet surrender to the possibility that someone might actually mean what they said. He thought about what it must cost to walk into every room already knowing what that room was probably going to do with you, and to walk in anyway, shoulders back, chin up, face arranged and ready. Every single time. He unlocked his car, got in, sat there a moment before turning the key. Sophie would be asleep. The apartment would be quiet. There'd be a note from the neighbor who watched her in the evenings, probably including some story about what Gerald had been up to at bedtime. He started the engine and drove home, thinking about a woman who had almost cancelled twice, and about the particular kind of courage it takes to walk into a room that has already decided about you, and walk in anyway, and about the fact that it had been a very long time since he'd sat in a parking lot turning over the shape of his life, and felt, for the first time in a while, like maybe it wasn't quite as small as he'd been telling himself it was. He didn't call her the next day, not because he didn't want to, he did, but because he'd built a habit over the years of not acting on every impulse the moment he had it, which was either discipline or self-sabotage depending on who you asked. Marcus would say self-sabotage. Nathan preferred to call it discipline. He went to work. He reviewed load calculations for a drainage project on the west side that had been sitting on his desk for a week. He ate lunch at his desk because the break room had been taken over by someone's birthday celebration, and he didn't know that person well enough to eat their cake. He picked Sophie up from school at 3:15 and listened to a detailed account of a disagreement she'd had with a classmate named Devon over the correct pronunciation of a word that turned out to be a word neither of them had actually used correctly. He made pasta for dinner. After Sophie was in bed and Gerald had been tucked in with the appropriate ceremony this situation required, Nathan sat on the couch and stared at his phone and thought about what Victoria had said outside the restaurant. Tonight was the first dinner in a long time where I didn't spend the drive home thinking about the wrong things. He thought about the way she'd said it, carefully, like she'd weighed each word before releasing it, like she'd made a small decision to trust him with something true, and was watching to see what he did with it. He put his phone face down on the cushion, picked it up again 20 minutes later and texted, Diane, did she get home okay? Diane's response came back in under 40 seconds, which meant she'd been waiting. She texted me when she got in. She had a good time. Nathan. And then, because Diane was constitutionally incapable of restraint, 3 separate emojis that expressed collectively a level of enthusiasm Nathan found slightly alarming. He typed back, good. Then, I did too. He put the phone down, went to bed, and slept better than he had in a while. He got her number from Diane on Wednesday. That evening he sent a text. This is Nathan from the dinner. Gerald wanted me to let you know he's leaning toward environmental law. He stared at it for a long time after sending it, with the specific regret of a person who has attempted a joke over text and can no longer tell if it lands. Our reply came 40 minutes later. He'll need a strong undergraduate foundation. Does he have a plan? Nathan exhaled, Sophie's working on a curriculum. It's mostly picture books right now, but she feels strongly about the visual component, smart pedagogy. Victoria wrote back, early literacy is underrated in legal education. Do you want to get coffee sometime? He typed it, deleted it, typed it again, sent it before he could delete it a second time. A pause, longer than the others. He set the phone down and did the dishes, which took 4 minutes. When he came back, I don't usually do this. Coffee. He wrote, saying yes when I don't know how it's going to go. He thought about that for a moment. For what it's worth, I don't either. I'm pretty bad at this. You didn't seem bad at it. I was nervous the whole time. I ate too much bread. Another pause. Saturday morning. There's a place called Clemens on Farrow Street. Outdoor seating. The coffee is actually good, which is rarer than it should be. Saturday works, he wrote. 10:00 single quotes clock. 10. She confirmed. Then, after a brief pause, don't be late. I tracked the clock too. He smiled at his phone in the empty kitchen. It was a completely ridiculous thing to do, smiling alone at a screen. But he did it anyway. Clemens on Farrow Street was a narrow, slightly cramped coffee shop wedged between a dry cleaner and a bookstore that specialized in maps, which Nathan thought was an admirably specific niche. The outdoor seating was 4 small metal tables on a strip of sidewalk, barely wide enough for them and not much else, sheltered by a dark green awning that needed replacing but hadn't been yet. Victoria was already there when he arrived at 9:58. She was at the far table with a coffee in front of her and her phone in her hand, reading something. She wore a dark green jacket over a simple black top, and her hair was down. It hadn't been at dinner. She looked different, less assembled, less arranged, and Nathan noticed the difference the way you notice when someone steps out of a frame and turns out to be bigger than the picture had suggested. She looked up when he was a few steps away, 2 minutes early. She sighed. I hustled, he admitted, pulling out the chair across from her. Hit traffic on Meridian. I take the bridge route. I know. You mentioned it. I should have listened. He sat down. How's your coffee? Good. Better than it looks. She glanced up at the worn awning. Everything here is better than it looks. I appreciate a place that doesn't oversell itself. Me too, he said. The server came, a teenager with headphones around her neck who handed Nathan a laminated menu and glanced at Victoria's cup. Another, please, Victoria said without looking away from Nathan. The girl disappeared back. Inside, they talked for 2.5 hours. It was the kind of conversation that doesn't feel like 2.5 hours because it keeps finding new angles, not the performed variety where both people are secretly impressed with themselves, but the kind that doubles back and gets interrupted by passing trucks and ventures down unexpected roads, the kind that happens when two people are genuinely curious about each other and keep discovering things they hadn't anticipated finding. Nathan told her about growing up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, about his father, who spent 30 years repairing elevators and had strong opinions about load-bearing mechanisms that had probably influenced Nathan's entire career in ways neither of them had ever sat down and discussed. Victoria told him about Connecticut, about a mother who had built sterling asset from a far smaller family fund, and then handed it to Victoria at 23 with 3 words, "Don't wreck it," about how those 3 words had sat on her chest every single day since, like a stone she'd learned to carry. Does she still? Nathan began. My mother died 4 years ago, Victoria said. It was a flat sentence, not without feeling, just stated, the way you state a fact about the weather. Cardiac event. She was 58. I'm sorry. She was difficult, Victoria said. And those 2 words contained the compressed weight of an entire complicated relationship. She was difficult, and she was brilliant, and she didn't know how to tell people she was proud of them. She just expected them to know. A pause. I don't know if she was proud of me before she died. I think she probably was, but I don't know. Nathan didn't say I'm sure she was, because he didn't know that, and she was smart enough to recognize hollow comfort for what it was. He just said, "That's a hard thing to not know." "Yes," she said. "It is." The teenage server came back with Victoria's second coffee. They both sat with the quiet for a moment, the comfortable, weighted kind that settles between two people who have just said something true. "Tell me about Sophie." "Victoria," said Nathan, who had learned to read the difference between a subject change that was a retreat and one that was a genuine invitation. Understood that this was the latter. So he told her. He told her about Sophie at 2, who had flatly refused to walk anywhere and instead demanded to be carried with such absolute imperial certainty that Nathan and Emma had briefly wondered if they'd accidentally raised a tiny sovereign. About Sophie at 4, who had decided she wanted to be a meteorologist because, she explained with great feeling, rain is dramatic. About Sophie now at 7, who was in a phase of asking questions Nathan frequently couldn't answer, and who seemed to regard this as a personal failing on his part. "What kind of questions?" Victoria asked. "Last week she asked me why people are mean to each other, if being mean doesn't actually make them feel better." A silence. "What did you say?" I said I didn't know. She gave me a look like I'd missed an obvious one. He rubbed the back of his neck. She wasn't wrong. Victoria turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. "She sounds like a person I'd genuinely like to meet," she said. Then immediately added, I mean that as a compliment to her, not as a. I wasn't implying." "I know," Nathan said. "I don't want to presume that this is Victoria." He said her name gently, and she stopped. "I know," she exhaled. "I'm usually better at sentences. You're good at sentences. You're just a little nervous right now. Is it that obvious?" "Only because I am too," he said. "But I think that's okay." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked down at her cup, and something in her shoulders released. A small, quiet dropping of tension she'd been holding since before he arrived, probably. When she looked back up, she seemed fractionally less like someone bracing for impact. "Okay," she said. The same word she'd used outside the restaurant. He was beginning to understand. It was the word she reached for when something landed somewhere real. They met the following Saturday, and the Saturday after that. It was never quite scheduled until it was. A text midweek, low stakes, a time and a place. 2 hours at Clemens, or once at a different spot. A Mexican place near Nathan's office with no outdoor seating but excellent breakfast tacos and a jukebox that played, without apparent logic discernible pattern. On the third Saturday, it rained, and they moved inside to the back corner of Clemens, cramped and smelling of damp jacket, a family with a loud toddler occupying the adjacent table. It should have been a worse conversation than the outdoor ones. It wasn't. They had developed by this point the easy rhythm of people who have found each other's conversational frequencies, who knew when to wait and when to push, whose jokes landed and why, who went quiet when uncomfortable versus who got louder. Nathan had learned that Victoria sharpened under pressure, her sentences growing more precise when she was nervous, calibrating herself under stress. Victoria had learned that Nathan had a tell when he was thinking hard. He'd go still and turn his coffee cup in slow quarter rotations. And if you interrupted him too quickly, the thought dissolved and wouldn't return. What they didn't discuss much was the obvious structural gap between their lives. Not because it didn't exist. It existed in persistent, visible ways. Victoria Sterling managed a firm with $17 billion under management and the staff of over 200 people across 3 offices. She had a penthouse in the financial district and a house in Connecticut she rarely used, and a car service she used instead of driving, because city driving stressed her out, which she mentioned almost apologetically. Nathan had a good salary by most reasonable standards of the word good. He drove a 6-year-old Civic. He bought his shirts from the same 2 places he'd been buying them since he was 27. He had the apartment and Sophie's rock collection and Gerald. None of this had been said directly. It sat between them like weather, present, occasionally noticed, never quite the thing. Either of them wanted to make the subject of the conversation. Until Diane decided it should be. It was a Thursday evening, and Nathan was making dinner when Diane called. and he made the mistake of answering, "I talked to Victoria today," Diane said. Nathan stirred the pot. "Okay. She seems happy. I mean, she seems, Victoria. She doesn't seem happy exactly, but she seems like she stopped seeming unhappy, which for her is basically the same thing. Is there a reason you're telling me this?" "I'm telling you because she mentioned you in 4 separate parts of a conversation that was officially about an event she's helping to sponsor. When I pointed that out, she went very quiet and changed the subject, which is how Victoria communicates that she's scared." Nathan set down the spoon. "I just want to make sure you're being careful with her," Diane said, and her voice dropped the lightness. "Nathan, she's had a genuinely rough time, not in the way people say that casually. I mean actually rough. People have been cruel to her in ways she doesn't talk about because she's too proud to let it show. Men specifically, men who dated her and thought it was fine, or funny, to make her feel small, and she let them because she kept thinking the problem was her. I don't think you're that person. I genuinely don't. I wouldn't have done this if I thought that. But she's starting to trust you, and that's not nothing for her." Nathan stood in the kitchen, with the pot simmering behind him, and felt the weight of someone saying something completely true. "I'm not playing a game with her," he said. "I know. I like her. I mean that, not as a qualifier." "I know that too," Diane said, quieter. "I just needed to say it out loud to someone." "Have you said any of this to her? She'd close down if you did. You know how she is." "Yeah," Nathan said. "I'm starting to." After he hung up, he stood at the stove for a while, not stirring, just thinking. He thought about the way she walked into rooms, that practiced, pre-armored walk. He thought about what Diane had said, men who made her feel small, and he felt something move through him that wasn't exactly anger, but was close enough to it, something dull and quiet and persistent. He finished making dinner. He helped Sophie with her reading homework, which was progressing well, and with her math homework, which was not, and never had been, a fact Nathan privately traced to his own childhood relationship with arithmetic and kept meaning to address. He didn't call Victoria that night. Instead, he sat down and tried to be honest with himself, genuinely honest. The way he made himself be honest when the comfortable version was available and easier. What he wanted, he decided, was to keep seeing her. Not because she was impressive, though she was. Not because she was interesting, though she was that too. It was simpler and harder than that. It was the specific texture of being around her. A conversation that went where it actually went, rather than where it was supposed to. The way she laughed when she forgot to manage the laugh. The way she looked at him like she was still making up her mind about what she was seeing. That particular feeling. He hadn't had it in a long time, and he'd mostly stopped expecting to. He picked up his phone. "Sophie wants to know if Gerald should take the LSAT or apply to law school on a portfolio. She feels strongly about the alternative admissions movement." 3 minutes later. "I'd need more information about his lived experience. Has he faced systemic barriers in his academic career? He's a stuffed rabbit in a 2-bedroom apartment. The systemic barriers are significant. Then the portfolio route is clearly more appropriate. I'll look into programs." "You'd actually look into programs." A pause. "Then, I find I'm enjoying this more than most things I do on Thursday evenings." He read that twice. Same. He wrote, the 4th Saturday. Nathan was 20 minutes late. There had been a situation at Sophie's school, a miscommunication about pickup timing between Nathan and the after-school program, and by the time it was sorted, he was already behind and hit a construction detour that added another 12 minutes. He texted Victoria as soon as he knew, which was the right thing to do. She replied, "Okay. I'll order you a coffee." A small and unremarkable kindness. It mattered more than it should have. When he finally got to Clement's, slightly flustered, hair still damp from rushing out without properly drying it, she was at their usual table with 2 cups and her book. She looked up when she heard him coming, and her expression was not annoyed. She just looked at him. "Construction on 5th, he said, dropping into the chair. "I know. I took the bridge route. A small dry pause. You really need to learn the bridge route. I know. He picked up the coffee. Thank you for this. It's a cup of coffee. She watched him for a moment with that measuring look, the one that had become less defensive over the weeks and more simply curious, like she was still working something out. Is Sophie okay? Yeah, just a miscommunication. She wasn't upset. She liked the drama of it. She told the program coordinator she'd been abandoned. He shook his head, with exactly that emphasis. Then she went back to her worksheet. The coordinator was more distressed than Sophie was. Victoria laughed. The real one. Quick and unguarded. She's theatrical. She really is. I don't know where she gets it. Emma's understated. I'm definitely understated. You're not as understated as you think, Victoria said. He looked at her. What do you mean? She considered how to say it. At the dinner, when you said what you said to Philip. Most people who are genuinely understated think of it in the car afterward, when it's too late. You just did it like it was the obvious thing. It was obvious. That's exactly what I mean. She turned her cup. It was only obvious to you. He sat with that for a moment, not entirely sure what to do with it. It wasn't exactly a compliment, or not only a compliment, it was more like an observation being handed to him carefully, like she was gauging its weight. I've been thinking about what you said, he said. That night outside the restaurant. Which part? About spending the drive home calculating whether you took up too much space. He kept his voice steady, not artificially gentle, just direct. I've been sitting with the fact that you've been running that calculation for years. She was quiet. That's an exhausting thing to carry. I told you. I'm used to it. Yeah, you said that. He looked at her. I just wanted to say, you don't have to do it around me. That's all. I'm not making a declaration. I just want to say it plainly, because I don't think you hear it plainly very often. A long pause. I don't, she said. Okay, then. She looked out at the street. A delivery truck went past and briefly swallowed the thin November sunlight. When it passed, the light returned and fell across the table between them. My last relationship, she said, after a moment, ended because he told his friends I was embarrassing to be seen with in public. She said it with the same flat precision she'd used when she told him about her mother. Just a fact. Just a thing that had happened. We'd been together 8 months. I found out from someone who wasn't his friend and wasn't trying to be cruel. Just genuinely didn't know I didn't know. She paused. I'd been telling myself I was imagining the way he acted when we were out together, that I was being paranoid. Turns out I had good instincts and was choosing not to listen to them. Nathan said nothing. He let it be said. I don't tell people that, she continued, not because it still hurts, though it probably does somewhere, but because it's the kind of story that makes people feel sorry for you. And I've spent a very long time making sure I'm not someone people feel sorry for. I don't feel sorry for you, Nathan said. I think you've navigated a consistent, low-grade, garbage situation with more dignity than most people could manage. That's not pity. That's just accurate. She looked at him, the measuring look, but softer. You're annoying, she said. Why? Because I can't find the calculation with you. She said it like it genuinely frustrated her. I keep looking for the thing underneath, the actual thing that's going on, and I can't find it. And I'm usually very good at finding things. Maybe there isn't a thing underneath. There's always a thing underneath, not always. She looked at him for a long, unguarded moment, the kind that doesn't happen between people who are still strangers. I want to believe that, she said. I know. You can take your time. Outside, a woman walked by with 3 dogs of completely different sizes, all pulling in different directions. For a moment, both Nathan and Victoria watched her trying to manage the situation and failing in a manageable way. They both nearly said something about it at the exact same instant, and the near simultaneous almost saying was its own kind of wordless exchange. They both smiled at the same time, and neither one mentioned it. Nathan finished his coffee. Victoria started a third. A cloud shifted, and the light changed, and somewhere inside, Clemens, the teenage server, dropped something with a loud clatter. and called out an apology to no one in particular. They stayed another hour when they finally left, standing under the dark green awning with Victoria's driver waiting half a block down. The goodbye was quick and unelaborate. "Same time next week?" he asked. "Probably," she said, which he'd learned by now was her yes. He walked to his car. He was halfway down the block when he heard her call his name. He turned. She was standing in front of Clement's, hands in her jacket pockets, November light coming down around her. "The bridge route," she called. "You get on at Calloway Street and stay left. You'll save at least 15 minutes, he nodded. "Calloway. Got it." She held his gaze for a second. Then she turned and walked to her car. Nathan stood on the sidewalk a moment, the wind lifting leaves from somewhere, and thought that 15 minutes was a small thing. Just directions. Just a street name. He thought about her face when she'd said it, though, like it had cost her something. Like she'd handed him a piece of something she wasn't accustomed to handing people. It wasn't a small thing at all. He found Calloway Street on the drive home. She was right. 15 minutes. Easy. The thing about trust is that it doesn't arrive in one piece. It comes in increments. A small admission here, a drop guard there, a moment where you say something true and the other person doesn't use it against you. You file that away quietly. The next time, you say something a little truer. The filing continues, and one day you look up and realize the distance between you and another person has closed significantly, and you're not entirely sure when it happened or whether to feel relieved or frightened. Victoria had been filing things away for 6 weeks. She was aware she was doing it. She was self-aware enough to recognize the process, which was its own particular frustration. Knowing you're being cautious doesn't make you less cautious. It just means you watch yourself being cautious and can't stop. She had a therapist, Dr. Renata Walsh, a dry and perceptive woman in her early 50s who had been working with Victoria for 3 years, and who had said in their last session, with the particular care of someone exercising professional restraint, "It sounds like you're waiting for him to do something wrong so you can stop feeling this way." Victoria had said, "That's not what I'm doing." Dr. Walsh had said nothing, because Dr. Walsh understood the value of silence in a way that Victoria both deeply respected and found deeply inconvenient. She was, of course, waiting for him to do something wrong, not consciously, not maliciously, but somewhere underneath the Saturdays at Clement's, and the evening texts about Gerald's legal education and the conversations that kept finding new rooms she hadn't known existed. Underneath all of it was the part of her that had been here before and knew exactly how it ended. And that part was watching Nathan Cole with the patient, tired vigilance of someone who had learned that the pleasant surface of things was rarely the whole story. The problem was that 6 weeks in, she still hadn't found the thing underneath, and the absence of it was, somehow, almost harder to manage than finding it would have been. It was a Tuesday evening in December when Nathan called instead of texting. That was different. Victoria answered from her office, where she was still at her desk at 7:45, because she was almost always at her desk at 7:45. "Sophie wants to know if you've eaten," he said without preamble. Victoria looked at the takeout container sitting unopened on the corner of her desk, where it had been for 2 hours. "Tell Sophie I'm fine." She wants specifics. "Tell Sophie I have food in front of me." That's different from eating it, Nathan. "I'm not being policed about dinner." Sophie apparently is. Victoria almost smiled. "Why is Sophie interested in whether I've eaten? She asked me this afternoon if you are my friend. I said yes. She said, do you make sure she eats? Because apparently that's what you do for friends," according to Sophie, who had to be reminded to finish her own sandwich at lunch. Victoria was quiet for a moment. The office was still around her. Most of the staff had gone home. The floor lights had dimmed to their evening setting. "She asked about me." "She asks about you most days, actually." He said it easily, as a simple fact. "She's not anxious about it. Just curious. She wants to know what you're like." "What do you tell her?" "That you're smart. That you're funny even when you don't mean to be. That you know a lot about things she hasn't learned yet." A brief pause. "She wanted to know if you like rabbits." I told her Gerald had come up in conversation, and you had opinions about his academic future. She was very pleased. Victoria looked out the window at the city below. She had a corner office on the 22nd floor. The view is genuinely spectacular. She almost never looked at it, because there was almost always something on her desk more urgent than the view. I haven't met her yet, she said. No, is that? Do you want that to happen? I think it's something we'd both need to be ready for, he said. No pressure. I'm not saying it has to be now, but I'm saying it at all. Let me think about it. Okay, that's not a no. I know, he said. It sounds like a yes. She did smile then, briefly, privately, in the empty office. I'm going to eat my dinner now. Good. Sophie will be relieved. Tell her Gerald sends his regards. She absolutely lose her mind, he said, and she could hear his smile through the phone before he hung up. She sat for a moment in the quiet of the office with the city spread below her. Then she opened the takeout container. The food was cold. She ate it anyway. She told Dr. Walsh about the call the following Thursday. And how did it make you feel? Walsh asked. Like someone was watching where they put their feet, Victoria said. Like I was being handled carefully. Is that a negative thing? I don't know. Maybe it's just what it looks like when someone is being genuinely considerate. She said the word, the way you'd hold up an object you'd found and weren't sure about. I'm not used to it reading as real. Usually when someone is that careful around me, they want something. What do you think he wants? I've been trying to work that out for 6 weeks and I can't. She shifted in the chair. He's not after the money. He's never asked about the company. He's never positioned himself anywhere near the financial dimension of my life. If anything, he creates distance from it. Distance how? Not in a resentful way. More like he doesn't want me thinking that's the reason he's there. So he steps back from it, which is its own form of impression management. But it doesn't feel calculated. It feels more like pride. He's proud of what he does, and he doesn't want the scale of what I have to make it feel smaller. Walsh wrote something. Victoria had always wanted to know what. And what do you want from him? She opened her mouth to answer, and then stopped, because the answer was right there, and she hadn't quite looked at it directly before, and it was both simpler and more complicated than she'd anticipated. I want to stop waiting for the thing underneath, she said. I want to just be present, without the accounting, without the calculation. She looked at her hands. I don't know if I remember how to do that. What would it require? Trusting that what I see is what's actually there. A quiet beat. That's harder than it sounds, for most people. Walsh said, yes, the conversation they'd been circling finally happened on a Wednesday evening, not in person, which made it both easier and harder. Nathan had texted earlier in the day asking if he could call that evening, which was itself a shift. He usually just called. The pre-announcement was new, and Victoria spent most of the workday intermittently noticing it. She was on the couch when he called, shoes off, a glass of water she kept meaning to drink on the table beside her. December had fully settled over the city, and the floor-to-ceiling windows showed a dark sky above the lights. I want to say something, he said when she answered, and I want to say it plainly, no preamble, which she'd learned to expect from him. Okay, she said. I've been thinking about what you told me, about your last relationship. The guy, a pause, and I want to be clear about something. I'm not making a speech. I just want to say it once, so it's been said. She pulled her feet up under her on the couch. Say it. I'm not embarrassed to be around you, he said. Not in public. Not with people I know. Not with Sophie. What you look like. The size of it. None of that is something I think about in the way that man apparently did. And I want you to know that's not me managing a reaction or deciding to be decent about it. It's not the thing. You're the thing. A long silence. Nathan, I know it might sound like something people say. It does sound like that, she said. Her voice was steady. Something in her chest was not. People say things like that. I know, but I've been sitting with this for a few weeks, and I didn't want to say it too soon, because it would sound like I was trying to score a point, and I waited too long and now I'm worried it sounds calculated. So I'm just saying it, and it's going to sound however it sounds. She pressed her lips together. Why now? Because Diane told me what she told me about your history. And I've been carrying that knowledge without saying anything. The not saying it was starting to feel like its own kind of dishonesty. He paused. I don't want to be dishonest with you, even by staying quiet. She stared at the city through the glass. Diane shouldn't have told you that. Maybe not. But I'm glad she did. Why? Because it made me understand something I was missing. I was taking your self-sufficiency at face value, which was a kind of inattention. You're very good at seeming fine. I was letting you seem fine instead of looking at what was actually there. Victoria sat very still. 22 floors below, the city went on. Constant, indifferent, alive. There's something I do, she said after a moment. I've done it my whole life. When someone is unkind to me, when someone does or says something specifically designed to diminish me, I make my face completely neutral. I finish the conversation, and then I go home and I'm fine. And I've spent so long being fine in those moments that I've gotten genuinely confused about whether I actually am fine or whether I'm just exceptionally good at the performance. Which is it tonight? He asked quietly. A long pause. Both, she said. Maybe that's okay. Is it? Yeah, he said. Being confused about that is pretty human, actually. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, and wasn't quite not one. I'm not used to someone telling me the confused version of me is acceptable. The confused version of you is better than the polished version of most people I've met, he said. The simplicity of it, the way he said it, like it was just arithmetic, was what got her, not the compliment. The matter of factness. She put her hand over her mouth briefly, not because she was crying, she wasn't, but because something that had been compressed in her chest for a long time had loosened, and she needed a moment with it. I'm not very good at this part, she said. Her voice was slightly different than it had been, less managed, the letting it be real part. Neither am I, he said. I'm 32, and I eat dinner alone 4 nights a week, and my greatest romantic effort of the past 2 years has been helping my daughter map out a legal curriculum for a stuffed rabbit. She laughed properly, the full one. That's actually good. Parenting. I thought so. They were quiet for a moment. The comfortable kind. Tell me something true, she said. It came out before she'd planned it. Right now. Yes. A pause. I think about what it would be like to not always go home alone, he said. Not in a desperate way. Just, I notice the absence. I've gotten good at it. But I still notice it. She closed her eyes for a second. Yes, she said softly. I know that exactly. Tell me something true, he said. She thought about it. Not about what would sound right. About what was actually true. Which was harder. I've been looking for the thing underneath with you, she said. The hidden calculation. The reason. She paused. I haven't found it. I keep looking. And I think I need to seriously consider the possibility that there isn't one. There isn't. I'm considering it, she said. That's as far as I can get tonight. That's far enough. She met Sophie on a Saturday afternoon in mid-December at a small natural history museum near the University District. It had a permanent geology exhibit, which had become Sophie's current intellectual obsession, the rocks having evolved from a personal collection into a structured area of scholarly inquiry that Nathan found simultaneously impressive and exhausting. Victoria had been nervous in a way she hadn't expected. She was accustomed to high-pressure situations. She had stood before rooms full of institutional investors. She had chaired board meetings where the outcome affected hundreds of jobs. She had navigated being the youngest, the only woman, and the largest person in rooms that had formed their opinions before she walked in. She was nervous about a 7-year-old. She'd told Nathan this on the phone the previous evening, bluntly, and he'd been quiet for a moment and then said, "She's going to like you, and even if she didn't, which she will, you'd be fine. She's just a kid, not a performance review. I know. Just be normal. She do the rest." Just be normal was advice that sounded simple and wasn't. But she held on to it anyway. Sophie was smaller than Victoria had pictured, which was irrational because of course she'd be small. She was 7. She had Nathan's coloring, the same direct dark eyes. She was wearing a jacket with a small dinosaur embroidered on the pocket and carrying a notebook, which she immediately explained was for recording rocks she hadn't yet encountered. "I'm Sophie," she said, looking up at Victoria with the uncomplicated directness of a child who hadn't yet learned to disguise curiosity as something more polite. "You're Victoria." "I am. Dad says you know about money." Nathan, standing just behind his daughter, closed his eyes briefly. Victoria caught it. "I know some things about it," Victoria said. "Do rocks have money value?" "Some of them. Diamonds are technically rocks." Sophie considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Gerald says property law is more interesting than finance law," she said. "But he's not sure yet." Victoria looked at this small, serious person standing before her with her dinosaur jacket and her notebook, and felt something in her chest shift entirely without warning. "I think Gerald should keep his options open," she said. "The best lawyers tend to move between disciplines." Sophie nodded slowly, processing. Then she looked up. "Do you want to see the igneous rocks? They're the ones made from volcanoes." "Yes," Victoria said. "I really do." They went to the igneous rocks. Nathan walked slightly behind them, watching his daughter explain the difference between basalt and obsidian to a billionaire CEO who was listening with what appeared to be genuine interest, and he felt the particular warm complexity of a moment that is better than you allowed yourself to hope it would be. It wasn't perfect. About 40 minutes in, Sophie looked up at Victoria and said matter-of-factly, "You're really big." The benign observation of a child noting a fact rather than delivering a judgment. Victoria went still for just half a second, that practiced stillness, before she said simply, "I am." "It's actually a good thing. Takes up more space." Sophie considered this, like a mountain, and moved on to the sedimentary section without further comment. Nathan caught Victoria's eye over Sophie's head. She held his gaze for a moment. The stillness was gone, replaced by something lighter. When she turned to follow Sophie, she was almost smiling. They ate lunch at the museum cafe afterward. Sophie had grilled cheese. Nathan and Victoria both had soup. Sophie spent most of the meal explaining her current theory, that Gerald would need a law clerk who was also a rabbit, for ethical reasons that were internally consistent if you accepted the premise. Victoria engaged with complete seriousness, asked clarifying questions, and at one point offered a counter-argument that Sophie rejected on procedural grounds. Nathan sat across from them, eating his soup, and understood with quiet and slightly overwhelming clarity that he was in trouble. Not bad trouble, the kind that changes the shape of things, the kind where you look at a moment in front of you and know that when you're on the other side of it, something will have permanently shifted. After lunch, Sophie needed the bathroom, and Nathan stood with her a few paces from the entrance. Sophie looked up at him and said, very conversationally, "I like her." "Yeah, she's smart," Sophie said. And she listened to the whole Gerald theory, even the part about the co-counsel. She tugged at her zipper. Devon never listens to the whole Gerald theory. Devon has a limited attention span. Victoria listened to all of it. Sophie said again, as though this confirmed something important. Then she went into the bathroom. Nathan walked back to where Victoria was standing near a display case of mineral samples, looking at a piece of rose quartz without quite seeing it. He stopped beside her. "She likes you," he said. Victoria kept looking at the quartz. "I heard. The acoustics in here." "Yes." A pause. "She's a good kid." "Nathan." "She really is." Victoria turned from the case and looked at him. They were standing close, museum close, the involuntary proximity of two people near an exhibit. Her expression was open in a way he hadn't seen from her before. Not managed, not prepared. "I didn't expect that," she said. "Which part?" She thought about it. "Any of it, really. The afternoon in general." A pause. "The way it felt to be here. How did it feel?" She looked at him steadily. "Like something I've been missing the shape of for a long time," she said. Without knowing it had a shape. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her. "Okay," he said finally, quietly, giving her word back to her. and she understood it the same way he understood it when she used it. Not a small word, a large one that had chosen a small form. The bathroom door opened and Sophie reappeared with her notebook, already open to a new page, already moving toward the next exhibit, metamorphic. She called back, because apparently that was where they were going now. Victoria and Nathan followed. Her shoulder bumped his arm slightly as they turned the corner into the next room. Close quarters, narrow hallway, not a calculated gesture. She didn't move away. Neither did he. Outside an hour later, in the grey December light on the museum's front steps, Sophie was already at the bottom landing examining a piece of gravel with scholarly intensity. Nathan and Victoria stood at the top and watched her. "I'm not waiting for the thing underneath anymore," Victoria said. She didn't look at him when she said it. She kept her eyes on Sophie. "I decided I don't want to waste more time on the accounting." He was quiet beside her. "That's not me making a declaration," she said. "I just wanted to say it out loud to someone who would understand what it meant." "I know what it means," he said. She nodded, still watching Sophie, who had apparently found the gravel significant enough to document. "She's going to get that all over everything," Nathan said. "Probably," Victoria said. They stood there in the cold, watching a 7-year-old crouch on a museum sidewalk and take notes about a piece of gravel, and neither of them moved to leave, because there was nowhere else either of them particularly wanted to be. The gravel piece ended up on Nathan's kitchen windowsill. Sophie had placed it there with ceremony, the evening after the museum, wedged between a dead succulent Nathan kept meaning to throw away and a cracked coffee mug he kept meaning to replace. She'd labeled it in her notebook, "Museum Sidewalk, December, grey, possibly limestone," and declared it part of her permanent collection. Nathan did not object. The windowsill had room. Everything in the apartment made room eventually, because Sophie had a talent for finding it. Victoria texted him that night, late, past 11, which he'd come to understand was when she did her clearest thinking. "After the workday noise finally fell away, I had a good afternoon." A pause. "Sophie told me the gravel might be limestone. She seemed to find that meaningful." He wrote back, "She considers most rocks meaningful. I've stopped questioning the framework. Good parenting." Victoria replied, "Then, I keep thinking about the mountain thing." He needed a moment to place it, then remembered, "Sophie, the display case. Like a mountain. Me too," he wrote. 3 small words, meant in the fullest sense. 3 small words can carry. January came in cold and flat. The way January comes in cities that don't bother easing the transition from the holidays. The Saturday routine mostly held, interrupted twice by a board meeting Victoria couldn't reschedule, and once by Sophie catching a winter cold that turned the apartment into a small, miserable infirmary for 4 days. Nathan texted Victoria from the couch on day 2. "Soup report. Homemade chicken. Consumed under protest. Gerald is apparently also ill. Solidarity." Victoria sent back, "Professional opinion. Gerald should stay hydrated. Also, do you need anything?" He looked at that message for a long moment. "Do you need anything?" Not a grand gesture. The practical kind of caring, which is actually the harder kind to offer, because it makes the offer real. "We're okay," he wrote. "But thank you," she replied. "I mean it. If you need anything," he believed her, without a second check. That was the thing. It was Diane, who'd, with the reliable timing of a woman who had been watching for precisely the right moment, invited them both to a dinner party in late January. Not an arranged setup this time. A genuine gathering, 8 people, Diane and Marcus's house. The comfortable chaos of a dinner among people who actually knew and liked each other. Nathan and Victoria arrived separately and ended up at the front door at the same moment, by accident. They stood on the step in the cold for just a beat. "Callaway Street?" he asked. "Obviously," she said. "You remembered." She almost smiled. He rang the bell. The evening was different from October's dinner in every meaningful way. Nathan knew most of the people. Victoria knew Diane. The conversation was looser, warmer, the kind that sprawls and circles and laughs at itself. Someone burned the garlic bread, and the kitchen filled briefly with smoke, and everyone pretended it hadn't happened, and then laughed about it. Marcus told a camping story that required 3 separate corrections from Diane to reach its actual ending. The evening was just normal, warm and imperfect, and exactly what normal is. Victoria, Nathan noticed, was different here than she'd been at Ardon in October. Less armored, still composed. She was always going to be composed. It was part of how she was built, but the quality of it had changed. It wasn't the bracing kind. It was the settled kind. The kind that comes not from preparing for impact, but from being somewhere you've decided is safe enough. She sat beside him at the table. Their elbows touched twice. Neither of them moved. Later, when the evening had dissolved into living room configurations, Nathan found himself refilling water glasses in the kitchen, while Diane stood at the counter watching him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "Diane, I'm just..." She sipped her wine, observing. "You're happy tonight." He set down the water pitcher. "I'm fine." Nathan, a fond look. "You have the face." "What face?" "The one you used to have before." She stopped herself, adjusted. "You haven't had it in a while. That's all I'm saying." She picked up her wine and moved toward the door, then stopped. "She's different too, you know. Since you..." A shrug, casual as she could make it. "Just so you know." She went back to the living room. Nathan stood in the kitchen for a moment and then followed. He found Victoria near the bookshelf, talking to James about something infrastructure adjacent, and she glanced over at him when he came in, just briefly. The way you glance at someone whose presence you've been tracking without quite looking. He refilled her water glass when he passed. She didn't make anything of it. Neither did he, but she caught his eye when he sat back down. And there was something in her face, quiet, real, unhurried. That said, she'd noticed. He looked back at her for just a second. She looked away first, and neither of them said anything about it. That was its own kind of language. The fracture, when it came, arrived from a direction. Of them had been watching. It was a Friday evening in early February. Victoria was at a client dinner, one of those long, obligatory industry evenings she described to Nathan as functional misery. When her cue, Derek Haynes, called, she stepped out of the restaurant briefly, answered, listened, and then stood in the hallway of a venue she'd been to 40 similar times before, and felt the specific cold clarity of a professional situation that had quietly become a personal one. The story, as Derek explained it, a journalist at a financial trade publication was working a profile piece on Sterling Asset Management. Standard industry coverage, nothing exceptional. The journalist had reached out to several sources, and one of those sources, someone who had apparently been observing Victoria's personal life with more attention than she'd realized, had offered not just professional commentary, but personal, specifically about her weight, about how she'd let herself go further in recent years, about whether a CEO who couldn't manage her own health could be trusted to manage other people's money. The source had added, with what the journalist described as casual confidence, that Victoria's personal life was in a strange place, and that she'd recently been seen around town with someone clearly out of her league. League specified, the journalist noted carefully, in the financial sense, so there would be no ambiguity about the nature of the cruelty. The journalist wasn't going to run the personal material. She told Derek directly that it fell outside her scope and below her standard, but she was calling as a professional courtesy to let the firm know the commentary was circulating, because in this industry, a courtesy call about circulating commentary was itself a message. Victoria went back to the client dinner. She finished the evening, said goodnight to 4 people whose names she'd known 4 years, got into her car, went home, and sat on her couch in her coat for 20 minutes without taking it off. She didn't call Nathan. She called Dr. Walsh at 8 the next morning, and Walsh answered, because she was a good therapist and knew Victoria well enough to recognize the weight of an 8 a.m. call. Someone is talking, Victoria said. Someone is always talking, Walsh said carefully. Someone who knows me. Someone with enough access to know I've been seeing someone, and enough spite to weaponize it. A pause. And I don't know if the target was me or him. What do you mean? The out of his league comment. That was aimed at him, not me. Someone is trying to make Nathan look like he has an angle, which means someone knows about him and chose to use him as ammunition. A silence. How does that make you feel? Angry, she said immediately. And underneath the angry, scared. Because he didn't sign up for this. He didn't agree to become someone's ammunition. Have you told him? No. Are you going to? She stared at the window. The morning was grey. If I tell him, he'll be decent about it. That's not what worries me. What worries you? That he'll start to understand what it actually costs to be around me. She exhaled. The tax. Being scrutinized and commented on and folded into someone else's narrative without your consent. He's a private person. He has Sophie. He has a normal life. And I don't. I'm not sure I have the right to ask him to absorb that. Walsh was quiet for a moment. Victoria. Is that his decision or yours? She sat with that question for the rest of the morning. She called Nathan that afternoon and asked if he could come over. She'd never asked that before. Their geography had always been neutral. Coffee shops, public spaces. The careful equidistance of two people who hadn't yet established whose territory the relationship belonged to. He said yes immediately. No elaboration required. She gave him the address and buzzed him up 40 minutes later. He'd been to the building once before. He dropped her off when her car service was delayed. Waited outside in his Civic, but he'd never been inside. She watched his face do the small, quiet recalibration that everyone's face did the first time they saw the apartment. The floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below. The rooms that were beautiful in the specific way rooms are when someone with real resources and genuine taste has furnished them over time. He took it in without comment, which she appreciated, and then he looked at her instead of the view, which she appreciated more. You sounded off on the phone, he said. I'll tell you. She told him all of it. Derek's call, the journalist's courtesy warning, the commentary about her weight, the out of his league framing. She sat on the couch, and he sat in the chair across from her, and she told it the way she told hard things, flat and precise and without embellishment. When she finished, she looked at him and waited. He was quiet for a moment, processing, not avoiding. Do you know who it is? I have a short list. What are you going to do professionally? Manage it. I've managed worse. She paused. That's not why I called you. I know. He leaned forward slightly, forearms on his knees, looking at her directly. You called to tell me. It affects me too. Yes, and to let you make a choice with that information, not to manage your reaction for you. He nodded slowly. Someone's trying to make it look like I'm with you for the money. Yes, because that's the only version that makes sense to them, the only available narrative in this industry. He looked out at the city for a moment, the first time he'd actually looked at the view since he arrived. Then back at her. You know that's not. I know, she said. That's not what worries me. Then what? You have a daughter, she said. You have a private life. A kid who tells her class about eating dinner alone. If being around me pulls that life into someone's narrative, turns you into ammunition, that's a cost. And you didn't know the cost when you started. I'm not sure it's fair to ask you to accept it now. A long pause. Victoria, he said. Who made this decision for you? The one where you were going to assess the cost and then tell me what you'd decided. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm 32, he said. Still calm, still direct. I'm not someone you need to protect from information. If there's a cost to being around you, I get to decide if I'm willing to pay it. That's not your call to make for me. I was trying to be fair to you. No, he said. Gently. You were trying to give yourself a graceful exit if you needed one. If you decide the cost is too high, for me, for Sophie, you can hand me the cost assessment and say this is why. And that would be you making the decision and handing me the paperwork. A pause. Is that what you're doing? Silence. No, she said quietly. Then what are you doing? She looked at her hands. I'm scared, she said. That's all. Just scared that you'll look at all of this and do the math and decide it doesn't add up. And I'd rather be the one who hands you the numbers than the one who waits and finds out later. He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up from the chair, crossed the room, and sat beside her on the couch. Nothing dramatic about it, not a gesture, just a man crossing a room and sitting down. "I've already done the math," he said. "I've been doing it since October." He looked at her. "The number I keep getting is the same one." She held his gaze. Her face was open in the way she'd learned to let it be around him. "What number?" "That this is worth it," he said. "Whatever it costs." She didn't say anything for a moment. She looked at him the way she looked at him when she wasn't measuring or calculating, just looking, just seeing. "You're infuriating," she said finally. "I know, because you mean it." "Yeah," she exhaled. Long, slow, the release of something she'd been holding since Friday night. "Okay," she said, the word in its fullest possible meaning. They sat on the couch and didn't touch. And it was fine. The city turned below them, indifferent and alive. And the afternoon light shifted slowly across the room. "The source," Nathan said after a while. "Do you want to think through who it might be?" "In a minute," she said. "Let me just sit here for a minute." "Okay, you don't have to stay." "I know." He didn't move. "I want to." She looked at the window. The city she'd been looking at from this window for 4 years. Alone on this couch, doing the end-of-day accounting she'd described to him. Enough, too much, wrong, right, space, fault. The arithmetic of someone who had learned to manage the ledger herself, because leaving it unmanaged meant other people filled it in. "I haven't let anyone up here before," she said. Not dramatically, just as a fact. He looked at her. "I know," he said. And she understood. He didn't only mean the apartment. The source turned out to be a former senior analyst named Craig Whitmore, who had worked at Sterling Asset for 2 years before Victoria terminated him for cause 8 months prior. A performance issue she had given him 3 separate opportunities to correct. A severance package more generous than the situation required. An exit she had handled with more grace than it deserved. He had apparently decided that grace was a vulnerability. Derek confirmed it a week later. The journalist, to her professional credit, had traced the commentary back to its origin and reached out to Derek directly. Craig Whitmore had offered the out of his league line with the casual confidence of a man who believed casual cruelty was safe because it was delivered without obvious malice. Victoria sat with this for 2 days before calling her attorney. She didn't tell Nathan immediately, not because she was managing him, but because she needed to think it through clearly first. And she was learning the difference between those two things. When she did tell him, she told him everything, including the parts where her first instinct had been to make it disappear quietly, through competence and silence and sheer force of will, because that was what she'd always done. But her attorney had said that quiet disappearance wasn't always in her interest, and Dr. Walsh had said something she kept turning over. The pattern of absorbing the course yourself is a habit. It doesn't make it the right choice. "What are you going to do?" Nathan asked. "My attorney is sending a letter. It won't be comfortable to receive." She paused. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm done with that approach." He nodded. "Good. It may surface somewhere. There could be coverage. I want you to be prepared." "Victoria," he said, steadily. "I'm prepared." She stopped. "You keep briefing me," he said. "Like I need to be ready for the field. No edge in it. Just honesty. I'm with you. Not next to you with an escape route. With you. You can stop briefing me." She was quiet. "I'm still learning," she said. It cost her something to say it. She could feel it. She said it anyway. "I know," he said. "Me too." The letter went. Nathan was not briefed further. He was instead called on a Tuesday evening by a slightly tired, slightly relieved Victoria, who said the situation was being addressed, that she'd had 3 glasses of water and 1 glass of wine in honor of the development, and that she wanted to talk about something, anything else, which was fine, which was exactly the kind of thing a person says when they have someone to call. They talked for an hour and a half about nothing in particular. Sophie's expanded reading list, a podcast Victoria had started listening to during her commute that was either very interesting or a complete waste of time, and she hadn't decided yet. The drainage project Nathan was wrapping up, or 3 weeks over timeline. Exactly as he had predicted 8 weeks ago. Did you tell them? Victoria asked. I wrote it in the project notes at the time. So you have documentation. I always have documentation. Good project management. It's also very satisfying, he said, and she laughed. Easy and unguarded and real. It was past 10 when they said good night. Nathan sat in the quiet of the apartment afterward, Sophie asleep, the city muffled through the windows, the kitchen light on, Gerald propped on the counter, near the limestone piece from the museum sidewalk. He thought about Victoria on that couch, that apartment, and about her saying I haven't let anyone up here before, not meaning the apartment, and about what it had cost her to say it, about how long she'd been paying that particular cost in silence, because silence had been the only option available. He thought about what she'd said on the museum steps. I'm not waiting for the thing underneath anymore. He thought about the February afternoon, the city turning below them, her voice saying let me just sit here for a minute, not as retreat, as arrival, the sound of someone who had been in motion for a very long time, and had finally stopped because she was where she was going. He turned off the kitchen light. He checked on Sophie, who was asleep with Gerald's courtroom cousin, a bear named Harold, who had recently been introduced into the legal practice, tucked under her arm. He went to bed. He slept, as he had every night since December, without noticing the quiet. March came in the way months come, when you've stopped measuring time the way you used to. Nathan noticed it one morning making coffee. A completely unremarkable Tuesday. Sophie still asleep, the city outside doing its early routine of garbage trucks and distant sirens, and the songs of urban birds who had long since adapted to traffic noise and seemed unbothered by any of it. He noticed that he wasn't doing the thing he used to do in the mornings, the low-grade accounting of the day ahead, what it would cost, what it might return. He was just making coffee. The absence of the calculation was so complete that he had to stop and recognize what the absence actually was. He thought about Victoria, not in the anxious way, not the weighing and measuring way, just the way you think about a person who has become part of the regular texture of your days, the person you want to tell small things to, the person whose laugh you hear in your head when something is funny, the person whose specific kind of directness you find yourself missing when 3 days pass without it. He thought about her, poured his coffee, and went to wake Sophie up for school. And it was ordinary, and warm, and exactly right. That was how he knew, not the cinematic version. No single moment with light at the perfect angle. The Tuesday morning version, which was quieter and more durable, and he suspected more honest about what love actually is when it isn't performing for an audience. The Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala was an annual event. Victoria had been attending for 4 years, first as a donor, then as a board member of the Foundation's advisory committee, which sounded more impressive than it was. She went because the Foundation's childhood literacy work was genuinely good work, because she'd learned early that presence mattered even when ceremonial, and because she admitted to Nathan with the dry precision he'd come to love. The catering was reliably excellent. She hadn't planned to bring him. Not because she didn't want to, she did, she'd known it 4 weeks, but because the gala was a specific kind of environment, photographed, socially charged, populated by people whose primary recreational activity was noticing things and commenting on them, and she was aware, in the practiced way she was aware of such things, that arriving with Nathan would generate exactly the kind of attention she'd spent years trying to move through invisibly. She'd been sitting with this consideration for 2 weeks when Sophie made it. Irrelevant. Victoria was at Nathan's apartment. This had become a thing. She arrived and sat at the kitchen table while Nathan cooked and Sophie showed her rocks and provided updates on Gerald's academic progress, and Sophie had looked up from her homework and said, with the absolute casualness of a child reporting a fact, "Are you going to the fancy party with Dad?" Victoria looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at his cutting board. "I'm attending a gala next month," Victoria said carefully, "for a literacy foundation." Dad likes literacy, Sophie offered. Most people do. He reads to me every night. Sophie returned to her homework, then looked up again. You should bring him. Fancy parties are better with someone. Nathan was still studying his cutting board. Victoria was fairly certain his shoulders were shaking. I'll think about it, Victoria said. You should, Sophie said with the uncomplicated authority of a child who had assessed the situation and reached a conclusion. He has a good suit. I do have a good suit, Nathan confirmed. Still not looking up. Victoria sat at the kitchen table and thought, not for the first time, that Sophie Cole was going to be a formidable human being, and that the world would not know what hit it. She asked Nathan that evening, after Sophie was in bed, standing in the kitchen while he washed dishes, a scene so quietly, ordinarily right, that she'd had to look away from it for a moment to steady herself. The gala, she said. The Hartwell thing in April. I want you to come, she said it straight. No qualifiers, no management, not because you feel obligated, because I want you there. He turned off the tap, dried his hands, turned around. Okay, it'll be photographed. People will notice. Victoria, I know, she stopped. I'm briefing you again. I know it'll be photographed, he said. I know people will notice. I don't care, he held her gaze. Do you? A pause. I care, she said honestly. Not for myself. I stopped caring about myself in those rooms a long time ago. I just don't want anyone to say something about you, to use you. And if they do, he said, then they do, and we deal with it. He said with the way you say a word that's earned its meaning. I'm not made of glass, Victoria. She knew he wasn't. She'd known that for months. The knowing just hadn't fully reached the part of her that still wanted to protect things that mattered. Okay, she said. That's my word. I'm borrowing it, he smiled. She thought, not for the first time, that Nathan Cole had an extremely unfair smile. April arrived. Sophie's afternoon was arranged. She went to Marcus and Diane's, which she regarded as essentially a vacation on account of their dog, Bucket, who tolerated a level of sustained roughhousing that Nathan's apartment did not accommodate. Sophie departed with her overnight bag, her notebook, and a prepared list of questions for Bucket. Nathan wore the suit, dark navy, well fitted, the kind a man owns when he doesn't own many, but knows the one he has should be right. Victoria had looked at him for 30 seconds at his door and said simply, good suit, Sophie called it. They got in the car. She was wearing deep burgundy, a dress made by her tailor, fitted and elegant and entirely herself, and Nathan looked across the car at her and thought of the first night, when she'd walked into that private dining room carrying her loneliness so skillfully that no one else seemed to notice it. He looked at her now. The composure was still there. It was always going to be there. It was part of how she was built, but the loneliness was not in the same way. You look beautiful, he said. She looked at him. No deflection, no small retreat, just looked at him. Thank you, she said. The Hartwell Gala was held in the Alderton Hotel Ballroom, a venue that had been hosting this exact kind of event for 30 years, and had perfected the formula. Everything was beautiful. Nothing was comfortable. The lighting was specifically engineered to make everyone feel like they were being quietly evaluated, because they were. They arrived, and the cameras came. The Foundation's photographer, the freelance society photographers who followed these events like professional weather systems. Nathan stood beside Victoria with his hand at the small of her back, not possessively, just present, just there. She felt it. She didn't move away. The photographs would appear into publications and one social media account over the following week. In everyone, Victoria Sterling stood straight, chin level, wearing her composure the way she always wore it, and beside her was a man who looked, in every frame, like he was exactly where he had chosen to be. The first comment came within 30 minutes, faster than Victoria would later tell Dr. Walsh she'd anticipated. Even accounting for the ambient density of these environments, it came from a woman who is Sylvia Hartman, board member at two foundations, professional philanthropist, the kind of person who circulates through events like this with the specific energy of someone who has never once questioned whether she belongs in any room. Mid-50s, expensively dressed. She'd known Victoria in the professional sense for 4 years. Not friendship, not exactly hostility, just a long-running mutual awareness of adjacent orbits. She looked at Nathan with a smile that was performing curiosity, while actually performing something else entirely. Victoria, I didn't know you were bringing someone. I didn't announce it, Victoria said pleasantly. The smile turned to Nathan. And you are Nathan Cole. What do you do, Nathan? Civil engineering, infrastructure. Oh, the syllable carried a specific weight, not quite rude enough to call out, weighted enough to land. How interesting. Her gaze slid briefly, assessing, then back to Victoria, with the expression of a woman filing something away. Well, it's lovely to have someone here supporting you, Victoria. I'm sure it means a great deal. She moved on. Victoria kept her face even. Her hand at her side had closed briefly around the fabric of her dress. Nathan watched Sylvia Hartman's retreating back. Then he looked at Victoria. Supporting you, he said. Double quotes. Yes, I noticed. Like you brought a volunteer. Sylvia Hartman views most people as accessories, Victoria said. It's a limitation, not a judgment worth carrying. That's very mature. I've had years of practice, she exhaled. Are you okay? I'm fine. Are you? She looked at him. Yes, she said, and meant it. Let's get a drink. The evening built the way these evenings build, slowly, by increments. There were 2 more moments before dinner. A man named Fletcher Obese, who asked how they'd met and assumed Nathan must be connected to Victoria's charitable work. Nathan had said, mildly, through mutual friends. Dinner party, October. Obese had recalibrated slightly, noted that civil engineering was important work, and moved on. After he did, Victoria looked at Nathan. You're very calm, she said. These are small things. They accumulate. Yes, he said. I'm beginning to understand that. She looked at him. The way she'd looked at him on the museum steps. The way she'd looked at him on the couch in February. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be, Nathan. Victoria. He turned to face her properly. Not making a scene. Just direct. I'm not apologizing for being here. Please don't apologize either. A pause. Okay, she said. There it is, he said quietly. She almost laughed. He caught it, the small arrested thing at the corner of her mouth. And that was the moment the evening shifted for him. From something to endure to something he was actually present for. The dinner program began at 7:30. The foundation's executive director spoke about the year's work, and the numbers were genuinely good. Thousands of children in underserved districts with access to books and reading programs that hadn't existed 3 years before. Whatever else the evening was, that part was real. Worth the room. Victoria applauded with the particular warmth. She showed 4 things that were actually good rather than performatively good. Nathan noticed the difference and thought about the ways you learn a person, not the facts of them, but the textures, the tells, the distinction between the public version and the version who calls at 8 a.m. on a Saturday when she's been awake since 6 and is finally being honest about it. He was thinking about this when the woman sat down beside him. Her name was Renata Park, late 40s, features writer for a city lifestyle magazine, the kind of journalist who covered these events with genuine curiosity rather than pure documentation. She introduced herself, mentioned the magazine, and asked if she could ask him a few questions. Nathan had the right to decline. He didn't, because he had nothing to hide, and declining questions had always struck him as a way of making things larger than they needed to be. You're here with Victoria Sterling, she said. Not a question. Yes, that's notable. She doesn't usually bring anyone to these. I know. How long have you been together? Since October, roughly. And you're in civil engineering, infrastructure, bridge specs mostly. She was writing in an actual small notebook, which Nathan found unexpectedly refreshing. What's it like, being in a relationship with someone at her level? The wealth gap, The public profile. He considered her. You want an honest answer or a polished one? She looked up. Honest, if you're offering. It's strange sometimes, he said. Not in the way people probably assume. Not uncomfortable in terms of the money. More just he paused, finding it. The world keeps trying to put a frame around it that doesn't fit. Like the only available story is one where someone has an angle, or someone's slumming, or the whole thing is serving some function I can't see. And the actual story is just a people who met at a dinner and found out they actually liked each other. Renata Park looked at him for a moment. That's the honest version. It's the only version I have. She wrote something. And Victoria, how does she navigate the public side? You'd have to ask her, he paused. But I'll say, she's the most capable person I've met, not in the resume sense. In the she single quotes, s-bin dash, carrying dash things dash alone dash, for dash, a dash, very dash long dash time dash, and dash learn dash to dash make dash, it dash look dash easy. Sense. He glanced across the table to where Victoria was in conversation. With the foundation director he composed, attentive, exactly right. The thing about people who've made hard things look effortless is that everyone stops checking whether they're okay. A pause. She's okay. She's more than okay. I just think she deserves to have someone paying attention. Renata Park capped her pen. Off the record, she said. That's a good answer. It's just a true one. Nathan said. The moment came near the end of the evening. Not from Sylvia Hartman, not from Fletcher Aldis. It came from a cluster of 3 people near the main bar, 2 men in their 40s, and a woman slightly older, all in the specific register of people who have attended so many of these events that they consider themselves arbiters of the room's quality. Nathan and Victoria were passing on their way from dinner back toward the main hall when he heard it, or parts of it. The way you hear things not meant for you when a room has reached a certain volume and people have had enough to drink to narrow the gap between thinking and saying. The taller man, with the particular careless confidence of someone who considers himself witty in private and has never fully understood where private ends, not sure what the angle is, but there's clearly one. Men don't just do a vague gesture, obvious in its vagueness. You know, the woman laughed. No offense to her. She's built a remarkable company. I just don't think we're supposed to pretend. Victoria's pace didn't break. Her face didn't change. Her hand at her side closed slightly. Nathan stopped walking. She realized it after 2 steps and turned back, and her expression said, don't. He understood the don't. Understood that she'd long since done the math on how much public confrontation was worth, and that the don't was the result of that calculation. He understood all of it. He looked at her for a second. Then he turned around and walked back the 3 steps to where the group was standing. And he stood there and waited the 2 seconds it took for them to notice he'd stopped. When they looked at him, he looked at the taller man. I heard you, Nathan said. The same voice he always used in these moments. Not raised, not heated, just direct. You were loud enough. The man's face rearranged itself into something performing unconcern. I was having a private conversation in a room full of people, Nathan said. So, not very private. A pause. You said there had to be an angle, a reason, because otherwise the math doesn't work for you. He kept his voice level. I want to say this clearly, so there's no ambiguity. There's no angle. I'm here because she asked me to come. I'm with her because she's extraordinary. Because she's the most honest person I know. Because when I'm around her I'm better than I am when I'm not. He paused. I know that doesn't fit the frame you had available. I'm not going to apologize for that. The man opened his mouth. And for what it's worth, Nathan said, quieter, the remarkable company you mentioned. She built it herself. At 24. While people exactly like you told her she couldn't. So, the next time you're going to compliment her in one breath and diminish her in the next. Maybe just don't. He turned and walked back to Victoria. She was standing exactly where she'd been, 2 steps behind him. Her expression was doing several things simultaneously, and she wasn't managing any of them. She was looking at him with the open and defended face he'd first seen on a museum sidewalk in December. And underneath the composure, something raw, unreal, and completely unguarded that he thought she didn't show people often. He stopped in front of her. "Sorry," he said. "I know you had a calculation." "Stop," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. He stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. The room went on around them. Chandeliers, catering, 100 people performing their social obligations in every direction. "Nobody has ever done that," she said. "In 8 years of these events, not once." He was quiet. "I've walked past 100 versions of that conversation," she said. And her voice was careful, but the careful was working harder than usual. "I've made my face neutral and kept walking and gone home and been fine. I had a plan to do that exact thing tonight. And you just..." She stopped. "You don't have to keep walking," he said. "That's all." Her jaw moved slightly. She looked at the middle distance for a second, the practiced composure doing its work. And then she looked back at him, and something in her face settled. Not shut down, settled. Like a storm making landfall, like something that has been held in suspension, finally completing its journey. "I love you," she said. The 3 words arrived like they'd been waiting behind a door she'd been holding closed for a long time, and had finally, quietly, stopped holding. Nathan looked at her. The room continued around them, indifferent and alive. "I know," he said softly. That wasn't calculated." "I know it wasn't," she exhaled. "I love you too," he said. "Since around December, probably." The museum, the gravel piece. She stared at him. "The gravel piece. Sophie said you were like a mountain, and you didn't flinch. And I thought, that's the person right there." He shrugged slightly, because he was Nathan, and grand declarations were not his natural environment, and the shrug was very him. "That's the timeline." She looked at him for a long, full moment. No calculation, no accounting, just looking. "You have terrible timing," she said. "I really do. In the middle of a charity gala, not my best venue, in front of the bar, yes, a beat." She looked down briefly, then back up, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the chandeliers. The real smile was there, the full one, the unmanaged one, the one she'd learned she was allowed to have around him. "Okay," she said. And then, because she'd been using the word long enough now, that it had become its own private language between them. "Okay." He took her hand. Not a performance. They weren't facing the room. They weren't making a point. The photographers had moved to the other side of the ballroom. Just a man taking a woman's hand, quietly and completely, because she was the person he had chosen. And that was the whole story. Her fingers closed around his. They stood there, the gala moving around them, and neither of them moving to leave, because there was nowhere else either of them particularly needed to be. The photographs that ran in Renata Park's magazine 2 weeks later did not tell the story of an angle or a calculation or a wealth gap or any of the frames the room would try to impose on them over the course of the evening. They showed Victoria Sterling standing straight, chin level, in deep burgundy, and beside her, a man in a navy suit who looked in every frame, a man who had chosen clearly and did not regret it. There was one photograph in particular, not the posed arrival shot, one Renata Park had taken herself near the end of the evening, phone in hand, Victoria and Nathan near the bar, facing each other, his hand in hers, the room all motion and noise around them, the two of them, still in it. She ran the photograph without commentary, which was its own kind of statement. The gravel piece stayed on the kitchen windowsill. Beside it, eventually, a second piece appeared, something Victoria brought back from a weekend in Connecticut where she'd taken Nathan and Sophie to see the house she almost never used. Sophie had determined that the property's geological composition required documentation, and they'd spent an afternoon following a 7-year-old through overgrown grass while she assessed rocks with great seriousness. That piece was darker than the first, basalt, or something close to it. Sophie labeled it Connecticut March, very old, probably igneous, volcanic, and placed it beside the limestone with ceremony. The house in Connecticut was used more after that. Not always, not constantly, but enough. A long weekend in June, when the city felt too much like itself. A week in late summer, that Sophie would later describe to Devon, the best week ever. A category she revised regularly. But always meant, Victoria kept her apartment. She wasn't going anywhere. Neither was Nathan. His work was here. Sophie's school was here. The infrastructure of his life was rooted in ways that don't relocate for sentiment. These were the practical realities of two adult lives built independently over years. That did not simply merge like water. There were logistics. Harder conversations than the ones they'd already had. The normal difficulties of two people trying to build a shared thing without dismantling what they'd each come from. The kinds of difficulties that don't resolve in a single scene and don't announce when they're finished. But Nathan took the Callaway Street Bridge route every morning now. He'd stopped thinking of it as a route and started thinking of it as the better way, which it was, which she'd told him from the beginning. Sophie, approximately 4 months after the Connecticut weekend, told her second grade class during a sharing exercise that she had to Holmes now. She said it with the matter-of-fact ease of a child for whom this was simply a fact about her life, like brown eyes or a rabbit named Gerald. Her teacher noted in the report, Sophie appears to have a stable and loving home environment. Nathan read that sentence and sat with it for a long time. Stable and loving. To adjectives he had stopped believing could coexist in his particular life, for a while. To adjectives that turned out, quietly and without announcement, to be possible after all. Diane claimed credit for everything, which was fair. She said it over dinner at her and Marcus's house. A dinner that now included Victoria as a matter of course, as naturally as it included everyone else. No orchestration required. And Diane raised her wine glass and said, I would like to formally note that I did this, Marcus said. You say that every dinner, Diane said, because it's still true every dinner. Victoria looked at Nathan across the table with the look that had its own language by now. Nathan shook his head slightly. Diane saw all of it and was insufferably pleased. She's not wrong, Nathan said. I know she's not wrong, Victoria said. It's still a lot. I accept the acknowledgement, Diane said graciously. I didn't. Victoria stopped. I'm not acknowledging. She's acknowledging. Nathan told Diane. I heard, Diane said. Victoria looked at both of them, then at Marcus, who was staying entirely out of it with the practiced neutrality of a man who had been married to Diane for 12 years and knew his role in these moments. You're useless, she told him. Entirely, he agreed, and refilled her wine. There is a thing people say about love, the shorthand version, the bumper sticker edition, that love is blind, that when you love someone, you stop seeing their flaws, their limitations, the parts that are hard or imperfect or difficult to hold. Nathan Cole never believed that, not even when he was in it, because what he had learned, in the specific and unromantic process of knowing Victoria Sterling, the real her, not the polished CEO, not the composed public face, but the woman who called her therapist on Saturday mornings, and ate cold takeout alone at her desk, and had spent years doing the exhausting work of carrying herself through rooms that had made up their minds about her before she walked in. What he had learned was that love, real love, is the opposite of blind. It sees everything, the walls and the weapons, the particular kind of tired that lives underneath the competence, the way she goes quiet when she's not okay, and is too proud to say so, the way she says okay when something real has landed, the way she looks at Sophie with that open, unguarded face, like someone has handed her something she didn't know she was allowed to want. It sees the mountain of her. The full scale, and then it stays, not despite what it sees. Because of it. Victoria learned something too, in the specific and equally unromantic process of letting herself be known. She learned that the accounting, the ledger she'd been keeping since she was 23, measuring herself against the room's judgment, calculating the cost of every admission, tallying what she'd lost and what she'd spent. That accounting was a habit, not a truth, a structure she'd built to protect herself that had eventually become the thing standing between her and the very thing she'd been protecting herself for. She didn't stop being careful. She wasn't built for that, and frankly, the careful was useful. It was part of what made her good. The precision of her attention, the patience of her observation. She just stopped applying it to Nathan, stopped running the calculation on him, stopped waiting for the thing underneath, because she'd done what he'd asked. Back in December on a museum sidewalk, watching his daughter place a piece of gravel carefully in a notebook, she'd considered the possibility that there wasn't a thing underneath, and she'd decided it was true. And it was, that April night, driving home from the gala, the city's lights below and the dark sky above, Nathan's hand still in hers in the back seat. She looked out at the water passing under the bridge and thought about a woman she used to be, not so long ago, who spent every drive home doing the accounting. Too much, not enough. Too loud, too much space. She wasn't doing that tonight. She was thinking about the photograph Renata Park would run in 2 weeks, though she didn't know that yet. She was thinking about Sophia's sleep at Marcus and Diane's house. She was thinking about a windowsill with 2 rocks on it. She was thinking about a man sitting beside her who had walked 3 steps backward at a party to say something true on her behalf, and who would probably do it again. Not because she needed him to, because that was the kind of man he was, the kind who found cruelty obvious and called it what it was, without ceremony, without calculation. She turned from the window and looked at him. He was already looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. The bridge passed beneath them, steady and solid. The kind of structure built to hold weight, engineered to last, designed by someone who understood that the most important thing about a bridge was never how it looked, whether it held. It held. The car moved on through the night, and the city opened up around them, and everything that was going to be difficult was still going to be difficult, and everything that was already worth it was quietly, completely, undeniably worth it.